Welcome, dear friends, to Family Shadows. Here, we share stories of sacrifice, love, misunderstanding, and the quiet resilience of fathers who gave everything, yet often found themselves forgotten. If you believe in the lessons hidden in family drama, in the bittersweet truth that sometimes pain brings wisdom, then you've come to the right place. Before we begin, please remember to subscribe to Family Shadows. Every story you hear here is a reminder that life is fragile, family is complicated, and love, no matter how it is tested, always leaves a mark. Today's story is titled, "I worked 2 jobs for their future, then they said I'd ruined their childhood." Frank Harris was 64 years old, but life had carved deeper lines into his face than the calendar ever could. His hands were the color of rusted iron, cracked at the knuckles, hardened by years of grease, steel, and late-night shifts beneath buzzing fluorescent lights. If you asked anyone in town about Frank, they would tell you 2 things. He was reliable and he never stopped working. For more than 40 years, Frank had lived 2 lives within one. By day, he was the man in blue coveralls at Miller's auto shop, sleeves rolled up, wiping oil from his brow as he bent over the hood of some stranger's sedan. By night, when most men were home with their families, Frank wore a faded security guard's uniform and sat in the drafty lobby of a downtown office building, watching the hours crawl until dawn. People often asked him how he did it, how he survived on so little sleep, how he endured aching knees and a stiff back while others his age were already planning retirement. Frank would smile, though tired, and answer with a simple truth. "I'm not working for me. I'm working for my kids." His wife, Elaine, had passed away when their daughter Tara was just 10 and their son Justin 13. Cancer took her swiftly, and with her gone, Frank found himself alone against the world, with 2 young faces staring at him for stability. He could have collapsed, he could have given up. But Frank had made a vow at Elaine's hospital bedside, holding her fragile hand in his calloused one. "I'll make sure they have everything. Don't worry about them. You can rest." And so he worked. The house they lived in was modest, a peeling white 2-story with a sagging porch swing. But it was always kept in order. The refrigerator was never empty. Tuition was always paid on time, and though birthdays lacked expensive gifts, there was always a cake, even if Frank had baked it himself at midnight. What his children rarely saw was the price he paid for those small certainties. They didn't see the way he sat in his truck after work, staring at his calloused hands before mustering the strength to go home. They didn't see him eat cold leftovers from a tin lunchbox on a metal folding chair, while across-town families dined together at polished tables. They didn't know about the nights he fell asleep at red lights driving from one job to the other, or the mornings he struggled to stay awake during parent-teacher conferences, his head nodding, his heart heavy with shame. To Frank, it didn't matter. Children were not supposed to see the cracks. Children deserved stability, even if it meant their father was a ghost in his own home. Justin grew tall, ambitious, and restless. By high school, he carried the same sharp jawline as Frank, but not his father's quiet patience. He wanted more money, more recognition, more life than their small town could offer. When his friends spoke of summer vacations with their families, Justin stayed quiet. His father had been absent from every baseball game, every school play, every campfire night. On the few evenings Frank was home, he would sit silently at the kitchen table, too tired to talk, sipping reheated coffee as if it might stitch him together again. Justin resented it, though he rarely said so aloud. Deep inside, a seed of bitterness grew, Why did Dad care more about working than being with us? Tara, younger and more observant, learned early to adapt. She became the kind of child who said, "It's fine, Dad," when Frank missed her piano recital, who waved it off when he didn't make it to the school science fair. She would hug him anyway, smile anyway, but a piece of her small heart chipped away each time. By the time she was an adult, Tara had learned to live without expecting much from anyone. She studied hard, built a career in marketing, and convinced herself that emotions were liabilities. When she introduced her colleagues to her father, she often said simply, "This is my dad, Frank. He worked a lot when we were kids." She never said he was always there for me, because he wasn't. Frank never imagined they would see it that way. In his heart, his labor was love translated into motion. Every oil change, every night shift, every aching bone was proof of devotion. He saw himself as the man holding up the walls of the house, unseen but essential. On quiet nights after long shifts, he would sit at the edge of his bed and take out a battered ledger. In it, he recorded every dollar earned, every payment made. Not because he needed to track it, but because it reminded him that the sacrifice was building something. In those columns of ink, he could see the future he had built for Justin and Tara, college funds, savings bonds, even a nest egg for their first homes. To Frank, those numbers were love letters written in a language his children could not yet understand. One spring evening, Frank sat in the empty living room, the television flickering in front of him though he wasn't watching. On the coffee table lay a stack of family photographs. There was Justin in his graduation cap, standing with his friends. Frank remembered being outside that day, standing at the chain-link fence because he had arrived late from the auto shop. He had clapped anyway, cheered anyway, though Justin barely glanced his way. There was Tara on her wedding day, radiant in white. Frank had walked her down the aisle, but in the photos he looked gaunt, exhausted from working a 12-hour night shift before driving 6 hours to the ceremony. His smile was thin, his eyes heavy. He held those pictures, one by one, and whispered to himself, "I was there, maybe not the way they wanted, but I was there." Now, years later, the house was quiet. Justin had moved to the city chasing investments and startups. Tara lived across town, balancing her career with her growing family. They called sometimes, but not often. Frank's phone would buzz with messages. "Dad, can you help cover this month's rent?" "Hey, Dad, daycare's more expensive than we thought. Can you?" There were never messages like, "How are you feeling today? Want to come over for dinner?" Frank obliged, of course. He always did. He transferred money with the same tired hands that had earned it, telling himself it was just another kind of sacrifice. But the loneliness gnawed at him. The house echoed too loudly. His wife was gone, his children distant, and the years he had given seemed to have vanished without leaving the gratitude he once imagined. What Frank didn't know was that a storm was gathering. His children had grown into adults with their own disappointments, their own unhealed scars. And soon they would voice what he had always feared in the quietest corners of his heart, that his sacrifice had not been seen as love but as absence. That the very thing he believed had saved them, they believed had ruined them. Frank, of course, could not yet imagine those words. If he had, perhaps he would have braced himself. But fathers rarely expect betrayal to come from the ones they gave everything for. Justin Harris never forgot the quiet moments of absence. They haunted him more than the memories of his father's presence. He remembered his 8th birthday, when Elaine had already been gone for almost a year. His classmates had gathered in the yard with balloons and cake. their laughter filling the spring air. But Frank was not there when the candles were lit. Justin had blown them out quickly, without making a wish, because the only thing he wanted could not be granted, his father standing beside him, clapping the loudest. Frank arrived an hour later, grease still on his fingers, a paper bag from the gas station in hand. Inside was a toy car too cheap to last, its wheels snapping off within a week. Justin had smiled, said thanks, Dad, but in his chest there was an emptiness no toy could fill. It wasn't the only time. School plays, baseball games, award ceremonies. Justin could count on one hand the times Frank had been there in the audience. And even when he was, Frank's eyes looked tired, his body hunched as if he were present in body but elsewhere in spirit. To a boy, that felt like rejection. To a boy, it meant, I am not worth his time. Tara's memories carried a different tone. She remembered standing backstage at her piano recital, her small fingers trembling above the keys. Other children's fathers filled the front row, smiling, waving, holding up cameras. The seat meant for Frank remained empty. She pressed the notes anyway, each chord heavy with the knowledge that when she looked up there would be no familiar face to meet her gaze. At home, the absences were louder than the presences. Dinner was often a quiet affair, microwave meals eaten in front of the television. Frank would stumble in late, loosen his boots at the door and mumble, "Don't wait up for me, kids." By then, Justin was already in bed pretending to be asleep, and Tara was curled under her blankets with a book, learning to soothe her loneliness in silence. Children, of course, rarely see the full picture. They did not know that Frank had worked 20 hours straight to keep the mortgage paid. They did not know that the electricity humming above their heads was a result of him sitting alone in a security booth, fighting sleep, telling himself just one more shift. They only saw the empty chair at the table. As they grew older, resentment hardened into something sharper. Justin, with his teenage temper, often snapped, "You care more about those damn jobs than about us." Frank, exhausted, would reply with the only defense he knew, "I'm doing it for you." But to Justin, those words sounded like excuses carved into stone, unmovable and unfeeling. Tara, gentler but no less wounded, kept her pain locked away. When her father missed her high school choir performance, she smiled the next morning and said, "It's okay, Dad, I understand." But deep down she did not. Deep down, she wished he had chosen her over the paycheck just once. Years passed in this rhythm, Frank working, the children growing, love buried beneath layers of misunderstanding. On report card days, he left envelopes of cash on their desks, rewards for their hard work. On birthdays, he gave practical gifts, new shoes, winter coats, savings bonds tucked into cards. He believed these gestures spoke louder than words. But children seldom measure love in dollars. They measure it in presence, in warmth, in laughter shared around the dinner table. By the time Justin entered college, he carried a silent judgment of his father. He envied friends who spoke of road trips with their dads, of fishing weekends, of shared traditions. His stories were of checks mailed on time and tuition paid without fail. Reliable, yes, but loveless in his eyes. Tara, meanwhile, buried herself in studies and later in her career. She told her friends that her father was a good man, just not really there. She said it with a shrug, as if rehearsed, as if absolving him, but in truth it was the only way she knew how to explain the hollow in her chest. For Frank, the years blurred into one another. He counted time not by seasons or holidays, but by shifts and paydays. Christmases were measured in overtime bonuses. summers in extra shifts at the factory. He believed fervently that one day his children would understand that when they were grown and saw the world's cruelty, they would look back and say, "Dad did it for us. Dad kept us safe." But understanding does not always arrive on schedule. Sometimes it doesn't arrive at all. And so, while Frank built a future brick by brick, Justin and Tara built a different narrative in their hearts. A story of a father who chose work over them, money over memories. They did not see the tired man crying quietly in his truck after missing another milestone. They only saw the empty seats. The irony of family is that love can be both fierce and invisible at the same time. Frank's devotion was unshakable, yet it cast a shadow so long that his children could not see the man behind it. And within that shadow, bitterness began to grow, a bitterness that, years later, would erupt in words Frank never imagined hearing from the mouths of his own children. It was a Sunday evening in late autumn when Justin suggested they have dinner together. Frank was surprised by the invitation. Justin rarely reached out unless there was a bill to be paid or advice to be asked. Yet here he was, calling his father on a crisp afternoon, his voice steady but distant. "Dad, Tara and I thought maybe we could all have dinner tonight, at her place." Frank agreed quickly, his heart lighting up with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He spent the afternoon preparing himself, even shaving carefully, which he hadn't bothered to do in weeks. He put on the same plaid shirt Elaine once said brought out the color of his eyes. As he buttoned it in front of the mirror, he whispered, "Elaine, maybe this is the night. Maybe they'll finally see me." When Frank arrived at Tara's house, he carried a pie from the local bakery. He had stood in line for an hour, determined to bring something more than his usual calloused hands and tired smile. Tara opened the door, and for a moment she softened. Her father's earnestness always pierced her, but she quickly composed herself. "Hi, Dad, come in." The table was set beautifully. Tara had cooked roast chicken, potatoes, and vegetables. Justin was already seated, his phone on the table, tapping it occasionally as though dinner were just another obligation. Frank sat down carefully, placed the pie near the center, and folded his hands in his lap. They ate in near silence at first. The clinking of cutlery filled the void where conversation should have been. Frank tried gently. "How's work, Justin?" "Busy," his son muttered without looking up. "And you?" "Tara, fine, same as always." Frank nodded, taking small bites, pretending the silence didn't sting. He thought of the countless meals he'd eaten alone after late shifts, and how he used to dream of sitting with his children like this, laughing, sharing stories. Now here he was, and the silence was heavier than loneliness. Halfway through the meal, Justin finally put his fork down. His voice was calm but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Dad, Tara and I have been talking." Frank looked up, hopeful. Justin continued, "We've been thinking about our childhood. And honestly, you weren't really there. You missed everything important. Baseball games, recitals, graduations. Mom was gone and so were you. We practically raised ourselves." The words struck Frank harder than he expected. His throat tightened, but he forced a swallow. "I was working," he said softly. "Everything I did for you too." Justin shook his head, his jaw set. "That's the thing, Dad. You think money replaces presence. You think paying bills is the same as being a father, but it's not. You can't just throw money at the past and expect it to mean you were there." Tara shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She hadn't wanted the conversation to start this way, but she didn't stop it either. She glanced at her father, her eyes softer than Justin's, but still filled with a quiet ache. Frank leaned back, stunned. He searched for words, but none came. Instead, he remembered. He remembered standing outside Justin's baseball field, still in his work boots, cheering from beyond the fence because he couldn't leave the shop early. He remembered sneaking into Tara's recital hall at the back row, arriving just in time for her final bow, clapping until his hands burned even though no one noticed. He remembered the long nights driving home, whispering Elaine's name, asking if he was doing enough. "I was there," Frank murmured. "Maybe not the way you wanted, but I was there." Justin's laugh was bitter. "Physically, sure, but emotionally not once. Do you even know what it feels like to grow up without a dad while still having one alive? That's what you gave us, a ghost." The words cracked something inside Frank. He put his fork down slowly, staring at his son as if seeing him for the first time. His hands trembled slightly. "Tara," he asked, almost pleading, "is that how you feel too?" Tara's lips parted, but no words came at first. She looked at her brother, then back at her father. Finally, in a whisper, "I used to tell myself you were doing your best, but yes, Dad. Sometimes it felt like you chose work over us, like we weren't enough reason to stay." Frank's chest caved under the weight of her words. He sat in silence, listening to the clock tick on the wall. The food on his plate grew cold. Justin, emboldened, pressed on. "You think you sacrificed for us, but what you really did was deprive us of a childhood. And now, when we look back, all we see is absence. You ruined it, Dad. You ruined our childhood." The word ruined echoed in Frank's ears. He lowered his eyes to the tablecloth, tracing the pattern absently with his finger as if trying to anchor himself. For years, he had believed that the ledger of his life balanced in his favor, that the nights of missed sleep, the decades of double shifts, the empty birthdays were redeemed by the safety, education, and opportunities his children received. But here they were, sitting across from him, telling him the debt was still unpaid. No, worse, they were saying his efforts had caused harm, that his sacrifice was not love but a wound. Frank closed his eyes. Elaine's voice rose in his memory, her last words to him, "Take care of them, Frank. Promise me you'll take care of them." He had promised. And now, after 40 years of carrying that vow like a cross, his children sat across the table and told him he had failed. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, to hurl the ledger of his life into their laps and scream, "Look! Look at everything I gave up for you." But instead he sat in silence. A silence so thick it pressed against his ribs. When dinner ended, Justin excused himself brusquely. Tara lingered, gathering plates quietly, her eyes never quite meeting her father's. Frank offered to help, but his hands shook too much to carry the dishes. He muttered a goodbye, his voice hoarse, and walked out into the cold night. The air bit at his cheeks as he stood by his truck, gripping the door handle but unable to open it. The words replayed in his mind over and over, "You ruined our childhood." For the first time in his life, Frank Harris wondered if his life's work, his endless devotion, his very identity as a father, had all been for nothing. The night after the dinner, Frank could not sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows of tree branches moving across the plaster like long fingers. The words of his son clung to him, heavy as chains. "You ruined our childhood." He turned onto his side, then onto his back again. The silence of the house pressed in. For so many years, silence had been his companion. He thought he was used to it. But tonight it felt cruel, as though the walls themselves were accusing him. Near midnight he rose. His joints ached as he shuffled across the room to the bottom drawer of his dresser. He opened it slowly, almost ceremoniously, and pulled out the old leather ledger he had kept for 4 decades. The edges were frayed, the cover cracked, but inside the pages remained orderly, filled with rows of numbers written in his neat, blocky handwriting. Frank sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing softly above him, and opened the book. The first page dated back to the year Elaine had died. Columns of income and expenses stood side by side: auto shop wages, security guard pay, tuition fees, mortgage payments. Every figure carried a memory. The overtime bonus that paid for Justin's braces. The holiday double shift that covered Tara's violin lessons. The savings bond bought in 1995 that would one day help pay for their college. He traced the numbers with a trembling finger. To anyone else, it was a collection of financial records. To Frank, it was proof of his love, proof that he had kept his promise. He remembered nights falling asleep in his security booth, jerking awake to the sound of the cleaning crew. He remembered the smell of burnt coffee that kept him alive at 3 in the morning. He remembered tucking $20 bills into birthday cards, his handwriting shaky from exhaustion but his heart proud that he could give. How could they not see this, he thought. How could they not know? The next morning, Frank decided he would show them. If words weren't enough, perhaps evidence would be. Children might forget the nights he wasn't there, but they couldn't deny the sacrifices inked into this ledger. A week later, Frank drove to Tara's house again. The ledger sat beside him on the passenger seat, its weight heavier than any tool he had ever carried. He rehearsed what he might say. "Look, this is my life. This is what I gave." He imagined their faces softening, their eyes filling with understanding. He imagined Justin's sharpness dulling into regret, Tara's silence breaking into apology. When Tara opened the door, she was surprised to see her father holding the worn book. "Dad, what's that?" "Just something I want you and your brother to see," Frank said. His voice was steady, though his chest was tight. Justin arrived shortly after, his expression already impatient. "What's this about? I've got a meeting in an hour." Frank motioned them to sit at the dining table. He placed the ledger in front of them, his hands resting on it as though it were sacred. "This," he began, "is my life's record. Every dollar I earned, every payment I made, every sacrifice I chose for you." He opened the book carefully like a priest opening scripture. The pages fluttered, releasing the faint smell of ink and dust. He turned to the entries that mattered most. "See this." He pointed to a line from 1992. "I worked Christmas Eve at the factory. Double pay. That money went straight to Justin's baseball camp fees." Justin frowned, shifting in his seat, but Frank continued. "And here, 1998. I worked 3 straight weeks of night shifts. That was for Tara's violin lessons, the one she begged for. I missed her recital because I was here." He tapped the page, making sure she could keep learning. Tara's eyes dropped, guilt flickering across her face. "And this," Frank flipped further, his voice growing thick. 2005, the college funds. I skipped vacations, skipped weekends, skipped life so you could have education without debt. Do you understand? I was there. Every number here is me being there." The silence that followed was heavy. Frank's hands shook as he pushed the book toward them. "I wasn't gone, kids. I was here, in these pages, in every paycheck, in every sacrifice. Don't tell me I ruined your childhood. Tell me what more I could have done." Justin leaned back, his jaw tight. He glanced at the ledger, then at his father. "Money doesn't erase memories, Dad. You think this proves something, but all it shows is that you worked. Yeah, you paid for things, but you weren't there. I didn't want camp fees. I wanted a dad in the stands. Tara didn't want violin lessons. She wanted you in the audience. We wanted you, not your money." Frank's throat closed. He looked at his daughter for help, but Tara's face was pale, conflicted. She touched the edge of the ledger lightly as though it burned. "Dad," she said quietly, "I know you tried. I know you thought you were doing the right thing, but it felt like you were always somewhere else. We can't measure love in dollars and cents." Frank's chest heaved. He had dreamed this moment would bring clarity, reconciliation. Instead, it only widened the gap. He pulled the ledger back toward him, closed it gently, and held it to his chest. For the first time in his life, he realized that proof was not enough. Numbers could not translate into hugs. Balances could not substitute for bedtime stories. His children saw absence, no matter how much he tried to show them presence in another form. A long silence followed. Justin stood first, muttering something about being late. Tara placed a hesitant hand on her father's arm before following her brother out. Frank sat alone at the table, the ledger before him. He opened it once more, staring at the years of his life etched into ink, and whispered to the empty room, "If this isn't love, then what was it?" The only answer was the ticking of the clock, marking another minute gone. For 3 nights after that meeting, Frank did not open the ledger again. He left it sitting on the kitchen table, as if it had become a stranger in his home. Every time he passed by, he felt it watching him, reminding him of the futility of his efforts. The house creaked at night, an old structure like its owner, weary yet still standing. Frank found himself wandering from room to room, unable to settle. He touched the doorframe where Justin's growth had been measured in pencil marks, lines climbing higher each year until they stopped abruptly at 17. He stood in Tara's old room, still faintly smelling of vanilla lotion and notebook paper, though the posters had long been torn from the walls. Every corner carried echoes. Laughter once bounced off these walls, now replaced by silence sharp enough to cut. And beneath it all, the words his children had spoken gnawed at him. "You ruined our childhood." One evening, Frank poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he seldom did. He sat at the kitchen table, the ledger still there, unopened, and stared at it as though it might speak. The amber liquid burned down his throat, loosening the knots in his chest. He whispered into the quiet, "Elaine, did I fail them?" Of course, no answer came. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator, the slow ticking of the wall clock. He remembered her final days, the way she had clutched his hand with fragile fingers, her eyes tired but trusting. "Promise me you'll take care of them, Frank," he had promised. And for 40 years he had lived inside that promise like a man carrying a cross up a hill, never stopping, never laying it down. But now his children told him it had not been enough. No, worse, that his efforts had harmed them. He sat there with that thought heavy as lead. If the sacrifice was meaningless to them, then what had his life been? He opened the ledger again. Pages upon pages of neat rows, numbers that once gave him pride now mocked him. His entire adulthood reduced to figures that no one wanted. Frank closed the book gently, then laid both hands flat on the cover. "Maybe this isn't theirs anymore," he muttered. "Maybe it never was." The thought startled him. For years, everything he earned had been earmarked for Justin and Tara. Their futures, their homes, their children. But what had they given him in return? Not gratitude, not presence, not even kindness. Only blame. The next morning, Frank sat at his desk, staring out the window at the street where children rode their bikes. He thought of the days he used to watch Justin wobble down the sidewalk, Tara chasing behind with pigtails flying. He had been too tired then to join them. Now he was too old. Regret was a heavy companion, but regret also brought clarity. At noon, he picked up the phone and called his bank. He asked to set an appointment with an advisor. His voice was steady, almost detached, as though he were speaking about a stranger's finances. When the call ended, he felt lighter, not happy, not yet, but lighter. That evening, he drove to the ocean. It was an hour away, a trip he rarely allowed himself. He parked near the pier and walked slowly along the wooden planks, the salt air filling his lungs. Families surrounded him, fathers carrying children on their shoulders, couples holding hands, teenagers laughing. He watched them with a pang, but also with something new, a desire not to be jealous, but to finally live. He bought himself a scoop of vanilla ice cream and sat on a bench, the sea stretching endless before him. He could not remember the last time he had bought something just for himself. And as he sat there, savoring the simple sweetness, he realized what had been missing all along. He had lived his entire life giving, pouring, sacrificing, without once pausing to refill himself. His children were right in a way. He had not been present, not for them and not for himself. He had lived as a machine of responsibility, not as a man. Tears stung his eyes, surprising him. He wiped them quickly, embarrassed though no one was watching. "Elaine," he whispered into the breeze, "maybe it's time I keep one promise to myself." The decision crystallized in that moment. He would not hand over the savings blindly, not anymore. He had carried the weight alone, and now he would choose how to set it down. If Justin and Tara could not see his sacrifice as love, then he would use that sacrifice for something else, for a life he had denied himself too long. Frank stood, tossing the napkin from his ice cream into the trash. He felt taller, straighter, though the years still bowed his back. For the first time in decades, he did not feel like a man working towards someone else's future. He felt like a man standing at the threshold of his own. When he returned home, he placed the ledger back into the drawer, not as a symbol of shame, but as a relic, evidence of a past chapter now closed. He went to bed that night not thinking of debts or duties, but of places he had never seen, oceans he had never swum in, mountains he had never climbed. For the first time, his dreams belonged to him. Frank Harris woke earlier than usual the next morning. For years, his alarm clock had been his master, dragging him up for shifts at the garage or late nights in the security booth. But now, there was no shift to rush to, no uniform to button. Still, his eyes opened at dawn, the habits of a lifetime refusing to release him. He lay in bed for a while, staring at the soft light spilling through the curtains. Something felt different in him, a quiet current humming beneath his skin. The heaviness that had sat on his chest after his children's accusations was still there, but alongside it was something sharper, clearer, a resolve. He brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen, and sat at the table with a pad of paper. Not the ledger this time. That book had been about obligation. This page would be about choice. He wrote a title at the top in block letters, "For Me." For a moment, he simply stared at those two words. He couldn't remember the last time he had done something only for himself. Every decision of his adult life had begun with the same question: will this help the kids? Now another question rose: what would help me? The pen hovered, then began to move. 1. See the ocean again, not just the pier, but the wide, endless horizon. 2. Visit the Grand Canyon. Elaine always wanted to go. 3. Take a train across the country. Watch America roll by. 4. Eat dinner in a restaurant that required reservations, not coupons. 5. Travel abroad just once. Paris maybe, Rome, somewhere that felt like a dream. He set the pen down, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The list was simple, almost childlike, but it was his. That afternoon, Frank walked into the bank for his appointment. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and perfume from passing customers. He wore his best jacket, though it was a little worn at the elbows. The advisor, a young man with hair slicked back too carefully, greeted him with professional cheer. "Mr. Harris, how can we help you today?" Frank placed the ledger on the desk, then pushed it aside. "I'm not here about records. I'm here about possibilities." For the next hour they discussed his accounts. The years of saving had added up, far more than Frank had ever allowed himself to consider. There was enough for his children to live comfortably if he passed it down, but there was also enough for him to live truly live for the first time. The advisor, though polite, seemed puzzled. "So you want to start using this foreign travel at your age?" Frank chuckled softly, the sound dry but genuine. "At my age, son, is exactly when I should. I've given my whole life to other people. If I don't do this now, I never will." He signed papers, arranged withdrawals, even discussed travel insurance. When he left the bank, the sun felt warmer on his skin. He walked slower than usual, savoring the simple act of deciding his own fate. Back home, he dug out an old suitcase from the closet. It smelled faintly of mothballs and dust, relic of a life that had known few vacations. He placed it on the bed, running his hand across its worn surface. Then he opened his laptop, something he rarely used beyond checking emails from his children asking for money. This time he typed into the search bar, "Best travel destinations for seniors." The screen filled with images, turquoise waters, snow-capped mountains, ancient cathedrals. He clicked one after another, his heart swelling with a mix of excitement and fear. For decades, the world had been something he glimpsed on postcards or in movies. Now it felt like it was finally opening to him. He bookmarked a cruise through the Caribbean. He looked at flights to Arizona for the Grand Canyon. He even lingered on a picture of Paris at night, the Eiffel Tower glowing like a beacon. As the hours passed, his list grew. Each new destination felt like a defiance, a declaration that his life was not yet finished. Still, doubt crept in. He thought of Justin and Tara, how they would react if they knew. Justin would explode. "You're wasting our inheritance." Tara would try to soften it, but the disappointment would still be there. Frank sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He loved his children despite everything. He always would. But love did not mean surrendering himself completely. Not anymore. He opened his wallet and pulled out a faded photo of Elaine. She was laughing in it, her head tilted back, taken one summer day long ago when they'd gone to the beach with the kids. He studied her face, the joy frozen in time. "What do you think, Elaine?" he whispered. "Would you be angry if I spent it on me, on us, even if you're not here to see it?" The smile in the photo seemed to answer him. She had always wanted him to live more, to see more. She used to say, "Frank, there's more to life than paychecks and responsibility. Promise me when the time comes you'll live a little." He had broken that promise to her, but maybe not forever. That night, Frank began making calls. He booked a flight to Arizona for next month. The Grand Canyon would be his first stop. His hands trembled slightly as he read his credit card number to the agent, not from weakness but from disbelief. For once, the money was leaving his account not for bills, not for tuition, not for another's need, but for him. When the confirmation email arrived, he stared at it with tears brimming in his eyes. It was just words on a screen, but to Frank it felt like freedom printed in black and white. He closed the laptop, leaned back in his chair, and laughed softly. A laugh of release, of defiance, of something long buried breaking the surface. For the first time in 40 years, Frank Harris was planning a future that belonged to him. The morning of his departure, Frank Harris stood in front of the bathroom mirror, suitcase packed by the door. He wore a new shirt, simple, button-down, light blue. Not expensive, but it was the first piece of clothing he had bought for himself in years. It fit well, and for a moment he hardly recognized the man looking back at him. There was nervousness, of course. 64 was not an age when men typically set off alone, but beneath the nerves was something deeper, a quiet, almost childlike excitement. The kind he remembered feeling when he was young and Elaine had said, "Let's just get in the car and drive." She had always carried that spirit. He had always been the anchor. Now, decades later, he was borrowing her wings. At the airport, Frank felt both invisible and extraordinary. Businessmen hurried past, families corralled children, couples held hands. No one paid attention to the older man clutching a worn suitcase, but inside Frank's chest, his heart thudded like a drum. For once, he was not working a shift while others traveled. For once, he was the one with a boarding pass in his pocket. The flight to Arizona was smooth. He pressed his forehead to the window as the plane lifted off, watching the world shrink beneath him. The neighborhoods, the highways, the places he had known for decades, all falling away. It struck him, suddenly, how small his life had been compared to the world unfolding beneath those wings. When the plane landed, he stepped into the desert air. It was dry, sharp, different from the damp breezes of his coastal town. The sky stretched vast and endless, painted with a clarity he had never seen. Frank breathed deeply, as if inhaling possibility itself. The next morning he stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon. No photograph, no movie, no second-hand description could have prepared him for the sight. The canyon spread before him like the open hand of God, layer upon layer of stone carved by time, vast enough to humble any man. Frank felt small but not diminished. For the first time in years, he felt part of something bigger than duty, bigger than sacrifice. He whispered her name, Elaine, and imagined her standing beside him, her hand in his, eyes wide with wonder. "We made it," he murmured, tears streaking his weathered cheeks. He spent hours there, walking slowly along the rim, pausing at every overlook. He ate a simple lunch at a cafe, then returned at sunset when the canyon glowed with fire and shadow. The beauty filled him in a way money never had, in a way duty never could. Meanwhile, back home, Justin noticed. He had logged into his father's bank account that morning, something Frank had once given him access to just in case. Justin had expected to see the same steady savings, untouched as always. Instead, he found large withdrawals, airfare, hotels, bookings. His jaw tightened. That evening he called Tara. "Have you seen Dad's bank account?" "No," she replied cautiously. "Why?" "He's spending it, thousands, on himself. Vacations, trips, it's like he's blowing through our inheritance." Tara hesitated, biting her lip. Part of her wanted to defend their father, to say perhaps he deserved it, but another part of her, the part still aching from years of absence, wondered if this was just another selfish decision, another way he chose something other than them. "I'll talk to him when he gets back," she said softly. Justin's voice hardened. "If there's anything left to come back to." But Frank was unaware of the storm gathering. From Arizona, he traveled to New Orleans, drawn by the music, the food, the life bursting through the streets. He wandered through jazz clubs, tapping his foot to rhythms he didn't fully understand but felt deeply in his bones. He ate bannets dusted with powdered sugar, laughing softly at the mess they made on his shirt. One evening, he struck up a conversation with another traveler, a retired teacher named Margaret. She asked where he was headed next. I don't know, Frank admitted with a shy smile. Wherever the road takes me. She laughed warmly. That's the best way to live. For the first time in years, Frank found himself talking not about bills, not about responsibilities, but about dreams, small, simple dreams of places he wanted to see. Margaret listened kindly, nodding as if reminding him that even in old age, new chapters could still be written. In his hotel room later that night, Frank wrote in a small journal he had bought at the airport. Day 3. I am beginning to feel like a man again, not just a machine. The canyon made me weep. The music here made me dance. I wish the kids could understand, but maybe this is something I don't need them to understand. Maybe this is only for me. He closed the journal, feeling lighter. For the first time in decades, the weight of being a father was not the only thing defining him. He was also a man, a traveler, a soul rediscovering the taste of life. The journey had begun. And though miles stretched between him and his children, though misunderstanding still hung in the air like an unfinished storm, Frank Harris felt something he had not in years: alive. By the time Frank returned home, his skin was tanned from desert sun, and his suitcase bore stickers from places he'd only ever seen in magazines. Arizona, Louisiana, a short cruise in the Caribbean. He had laughed more in those few weeks than in the last 2 decades combined. But his children were waiting. Justin and Tara stood in his living room when he walked through the door. Justin's arms were crossed, his expression a storm barely contained. Tara looked uneasy, her eyes darting between her brother and her father. "Where have you been?" Justin demanded. Frank set his suitcase down gently. "Traveling. Traveling." Justin's voice rose. "With our inheritance. With the money you promised would secure our futures." Frank took off his jacket slowly, hanging it on the rack by the door. He did not rush to answer. For years he had let anger dictate the terms of every conversation. Tonight he would not. "I used the money I earned," he said calmly. "The money I worked for, the money I nearly killed myself making. Yes, I spent it on me." Justin's face reddened. "On you after everything. You were never there when we were kids. And now when you could finally give us something back, you—" "Enough," Frank interrupted, his voice sharper than they had ever heard. The firmness startled even himself. "For 40 years I lived only for you. I worked myself to the bone so you could stand here today with your degrees, your careers, your homes. And what did you give me in return? Blame. Accusations. You tell me I ruined your childhood. Well, maybe I did, but I will not ruin what remains of my life." The room fell silent. Tara's eyes filled, but Justin clenched his fists, unwilling to yield. Frank walked past them, opened the old drawer, and pulled out the ledger. He laid it on the coffee table once more, but this time he didn't push it toward them. He tapped the cover gently. "This book," he said softly, "isn't about you anymore. It's about me. It's about what I gave and what I lost. I won't argue with you anymore. I won't beg you to see it. I only know this: a man can't live his whole life as a sacrifice. At some point he has to live as a man." Justin shook his head, muttering "selfish" before storming out the door. Tara remained. She sat on the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know how to feel. Part of me is angry, part of me I don't know, I just don't know." Frank placed a hand on hers. His eyes were tired but gentle. "Then don't know, that's okay. But don't call me ruined. Don't call me absent. I was here, Tara. Maybe not in the ways you wanted, but I was here. And now I need to be here for myself." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She kissed his hand before leaving Frank alone in the quiet house. That night he sat at the kitchen table with his journal. He wrote slowly, carefully. They will never understand me fully. That's the truth, but maybe it's not their job to. Maybe my life was never meant to be measured only in what I gave them. Maybe I was meant to keep a peace for myself, and that peace begins now. He closed the journal and poured himself tea. For once, he felt at peace. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. A fellow traveler he had met on the cruise posted a picture of him online. A candid shot of Frank standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, tears in his eyes, whispering his late wife's name. The caption read, "This man told me he worked 2 jobs for 40 years to give his children everything. They told him he ruined their childhood. So now he's finally living for himself. And look at him, free." Post spread quickly. Strangers shared it, commented, sent messages of encouragement. Thousands of people, fathers, mothers, children who had once misunderstood their own parents, saw themselves in Frank. Back home, Justin scrolled through his feed and froze. There was his father, his story laid bare for the world. Comment after comment poured in. He deserves every minute of joy. Children don't know until they are parents themselves. This man is a hero. For the first time, Justin felt something he had buried beneath anger, shame. He closed his phone and sat in silence, the weight of realization pressing down. Tara, too, saw the post. Unlike her brother, she cried openly. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad," though he could not hear. But Frank did not need their apologies to keep living. On a warm evening, he boarded another plane bound for Paris. He sat by the window again, hands folded, eyes bright with anticipation. When the plane lifted into the clouds, he whispered, "Elaine, we're still going." And as the engines roared, Frank Harris smiled, not as a father carrying burdens, not as a man haunted by regret, but simply as himself. For once, his life belonged to him. And dear friends, that is the story of Frank Harris, a father who gave everything and finally learned that sacrifice does not mean surrendering your entire soul. His lesson is simple but eternal. Love your children, yes, but do not forget to live for yourself. Thank you for listening to this story on Family Shadows. If it touched you, please consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey we share together. May you always carry gratitude in your hearts, balance in your lives, and may your homes be filled with health, peace, and happiness. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of one another.